Shalom, welcome to Thursday Bible Study. Today we're going to be looking at Sarah and Hagar in the Bible and the choices that they made and how it affected all those around. So let's just open in prayer. Father God, we just thank you for today. We thank you for those who are here and those who might be listening, that you'll just bless them. And we're just searching for wisdom, Lord. Wisdom from your word, so just fill us with your word, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, the scripture for the day is Psalm 37:7, the first part of it. So, be still in the presence of the Lord and wait patiently for him to act. That's something for all of us to consider. We in our little world are so impatient at times for things to happen, and God has his own timetable, and we just need to trust him. And as we look at Sarah today, we find that that was her problem also. She became impatient. Who wouldn't after 25 years, huh? Or even longer than that when you think about her whole married life. So, but it's a good thing to remember, especially in our lives today, because we tend to get anxious when we see the things happening in the world, and we know that God is still in control, and he will act when the time is right, perfectly right, and not our time. So, okay, the book of mysteries today is 296. It's the Ishmael Mystery. We're observing one of the encampments where a group of children were at play, darting in and out of the tents, hiding, laughing, running after and away from each other. It was in a camp of tents like this, said the teacher, a camp with children, that an event took place upon which hung the peace of the entire world, a mystery of two children in a desert tent camp. Well, which camp was that, I asked. The camp of Abraham. And it was there because of an ongoing conflict that Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son and the son of his maid Hagar, was in effect exiled from the rest of the family. Isaac, Abraham's son by his wife Sarah, remained. Imagine being Ishmael. To him it was the end of the world, the loss of everything he had known, his father, his birthright, his inheritance, his promises of God, the covenant, the land of Israel, everything. And it'd be enough for a boy to grow up embittered, jealous, and angry. And yet God blessed Ishmael and made him a great nation. His descendants would end up far more numerous than those of Isaac, and far more land. But the conflict between Ishmael and Isaac would continue through the ages. From Isaac would come the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, to whom was given the land of Israel and the covenant. And who, I ask, are the children of Ishmael? They are called Ishmaelites, and from ancient times were identified with the Arabs, even by ancient and pre-Islamic Arab tribes. Muhammad himself claimed to be Ishmael's direct descendant, and in the Quran exalted him. The blood of Ishmael undoubtedly flows through the Arab world, and it's there that his identity and mantle have been taken up. Ishmael's fury has more than once shaken the world and continues to rage against his brother Isaac. The nation of Israel, and over what? Over the birthright, over the land, over Abraham's legacy, and over Isaac's inheritance. And so the fate of the world has rested on this ancient mystery that began in the tents of Abraham. And what does the mystery of Ishmael tell you? Never let bitterness take root. Never allow yourself to live as a victim. Never dwell on the blessings you don't have and miss all the blessings you do. And the one who's most blessed is not the one who's given the most, but the one who has received and most dwells on the blessings that he's been given. So the mission today is live today not focusing on the blessings you don't have, but dwelling on all the blessings you do.
Amen.
So, okay.
Amen.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Good one.
Yep. All right, our Hebrew word study today, I've got a list here. We're going to look at the name Sarai, and that was her original name, her given at birth, meaning my princess.
Was she a princess?
Now, she was certainly a beauty, and we really don't know how these names come about, whether God just, gave that name to the father and Maybe she was a beautiful little girl. I'm sure she was a beautiful little baby, and maybe he just thought she looked like a princess. As far as we know, there wasn't any royalty about that.
Called me his princess.
Yes, sure.
Well, they say that her beauty, it was so powerful that Abraham feared for his life
Yes,
because of her.
yes.
Other men would kill him.
Still attractive at 65, 75. That's that's doing pretty good.
Jewish women are beautiful.
Yes, their skin and all, and yes. So, but God changed her name, and He changed it to Sarah, and there are two viewpoints of this. The Jews, many of the Jews believe that that is adding on Yah, which is a form of Yahweh, God, and so putting God at the end of her name. That's one possibility. But most people believe it's Princess of Many, because she did give birth, and then it went on to have a lot of descendants. I really like the first one the best myself, but God knows. The next word is Hagar, and of course that is the Egyptian handmaiden, and that comes from the word Agar, and it means forsaken or flight, and so we see how fitting that is. Isn't it interesting that they are named before these events happen quite often? God purposes, and it almost directs their path in life. I wonder if that influences what happens to them by their name. You'd think it might. I mean, poor little Ichabod. God has departed. I mean, how would you like to go through that? Interesting, the names. Now, Orak Apaim is a word that we're going to be running into, which means patience, something that Sarah ran out of. And there's a word that is so connected to patience, and it's suffering. Because when we're patient, we tend to suffer. Maybe not physically, but spiritually or mentally, we can suffer when we are going through something like that. And it's sablanut. Sablanut. And I took this out of God's Secrets, written by Dr. Ben Gigi. He said, patience is the ability to wait quietly or face rejection or delay, ability to bear calmly with self-control, frustrating and upsetting situations. But the Hebrew word suggests the primal feeling one experiences while being patient, suffering. So, depending on what you're being patiently waiting for, it can be a suffering, I think so many people today are suffering over things that are going on, and saying, when is this going to change? Is it going to change? And it can just be, even if it's not physical, it's a suffering. So, as I said, we're going to look at Sarah and Hagar, two of the women in Abraham's world. A little bit of background on Sarah. She was related to Abraham. It usually says she was his half-sister. That's one possibility, that she would have been had the same father, Terah, as Abraham, but another mother. The other possibility, and many believe this is the actual thing, is that she was the niece of Abraham. So whichever, she was within the family, and she was 10 years younger than he. And a little perspective on things. Abraham was he was born 292 years after the flood. Not very long when you think about it. 292 years. And so when we look at the ages of Noah and Shem, they would have still been alive. In Genesis 9:28, it says that Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So that would have made Abraham 58 years old when Noah died. And we don't put these things together because the Bible doesn't give us that information. But they give us enough little nuggets to put things together. So it's very possible that they knew each other, and the Jewish scribes do have their little viewpoints and talk about, them meeting each other, and that is why Abraham, or Abram at the time, that's why he knew about God, and believed God. And interesting little story. Now, Terah means idol. Remember when Rachel hid the teraphim? Okay, that comes from his name, Terah. Teraphim. Teraphim means idols. So that's the connection there. And so he was an idol maker. And the little story the little Jewish story that is running about, that I've read several times, that Abraham really didn't like the whole situation. His father had this kind of little manufacturing thing of all these idols, and he went in there and he broke some of them, knocked some of them down. And Terah came in, had a fit, and he said, what happened? And Abraham said, well, they just, I don't know whether he said they got in a fight or something like that, and they knocked him down. He said, that's impossible. And he said, yes, that's impossible, He was making the point within that story, that the idols were just simply man-made things. So interesting little things, about him that kind of gives a little bit more of a picture about their life. And of course, they moved. The Bible says that Terah moved the family to away from Ur, and it was I'm trying to think of the son's name. Nahor was one son, and the name escapes me where they moved. They moved to the west from Ur, and they lived there for a while. And then God reached out to Abram and said, I want you to leave your father's house and leave your kindred, which is kind of a key thing, which he did not do, and then go to a land which I will show you. So it says then, so he departed with Sarah, and he departed with Lot. Well, that was the one thing that God said not to do. He said, leave your kindred. And he could take his wife, of course, but leave the kindred. And, of course, Lot caused quite a commotion along the way, because when it's decisions we make, and Lot was probably a young guy. We don't know if he was married yet. It seems to be that he wasn't married yet, and it's believed that he had picked up his wife somewhere along the way, and she was probably a pagan woman. And of course, we know what happened with Lot and the whole situation. She really had a lot of influence on Lot, as to where they went. He kind of leaned that way, kind of that softness of civilization. Anyway, appealed to him. But I'm sure that his wife had a lot of influence in that. So even who you marry is very important, very important. So I was always taught that that Abraham waited until Terah died and then he left. But it doesn't say that. It just says he left when God told him to. And it's really believed that Terah was still alive when he left. The Jews do not like to focus on that because they believe it's wrong for a man to leave his family, his father, before his death. He needs to take care of that whole situation of his death and everything, and then he can leave or do what he wants to do. It's important for the son to take care of the father in that manner. And so to have him leave before his father died, but we have to remember his brother was still alive at that time too. So just little things to think about, that we're not sure about, but it just seems to give an indication in the Bible, if you follow the way things are written, why you can kind of assume certain things. So he left with Sarah. Remember, she was 10 years younger. And another thing is that Nimrod was still probably alive at this time. Trying to get all these characters in the Bible together, then we get a real picture of what's going on, and you can understand. Ur was really the center of paganism, and that's where it all began. We talked about Semiramis last week and how she was so influential and really influential in planting those seeds that spread all over the world. But Ur was the seed planting area for paganism. And so, and as Terah came from there as an idol maker, we understand what that was all about then, and why he would have been making these idols, So that was his profession.
Sandra, is a, lack of a better word, a state or a country, or is it a town?
It was an area. It's really the area, the
Close to
Babylon.
Babel?
Yeah,
Oh, so-
Babel was right in that
Okay.
right in that vicinity.
We
Yeah,
spoke about all of
Yeah.
the pagan and
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
false doctrine religions
I'm wondering if we have a.
to this day started at the Tower of Babel. So I was curious, what proximity and Babel?
Okay, it would have been. Here is is right here.
Okay.
Now here's Jerusalem right here in Israel. Is way over here. Babylon, see, isn't very far. Just
Well,
right here.
The Tower of Babel, was it in or was it in Babylon? Or
Well, I think it was
somewhere
outside of Babylon. I can't put my finger on it to tell you the truth with this
basically
with
that
this
kind
map.
of general
Yeah,
area, just
yeah,
like
this
the
whole
general
area. Yeah,
area where
Yeah.
all the giants were as well.
Which was probably 25 miles.
Let's see. That's 100. Yeah, about 100 miles, give or take. And so Terah and his family moved, and they moved to this direction here. I can't see. They don't have the town on here. What I can't remember that other son, Abraham's other brother. It started with an H. All I can think of is Hagar. I got Hagar in my brain. But anyway, it would have been in this area here, probably. And look at what's here. It's Nineveh. Remember Nineveh and Jonah? So all these things are kind of coming together. Okay, so he stayed there, and that's where God said, I want you to keep on going. And so he went here and then came down. So that was their route down through here. And then he got down into there, and then there was a famine. Remember the famine? So they went to Egypt, and that's where they kind of got into a little bit of trouble there. So that's part of the history there. Now Sarah was, as I said, she was 10 years younger than Abram, and she probably, the custom of that day, girls married young. Probably a young teenager. So they'd been married a long time. Now Genesis 11:29 mentions Abraham's brother Nahor, and it puts them marrying, the two brothers marrying about the same time. They said Nahor married, I can't remember what her name was, and Abraham married Sarah. So approximately the same time they were young married couples. And then it says, mentions children to some effect. I can't remember. I should go to that verse and read it. But it indicates, that they had children because the next verse says, but Sarah was barren. So right from the beginning, she had that heartache of not having a child. And I can understand that because I had a miscarriage, my first child, and my sister-in-law was pregnant at the same time. And so, it's just difficult to watch that baby grow, and then when the baby's born, playing, and you can have joy for that person, but you have a heartache, wondering whether you'll be able to have children or not. So I can sympathize with and emphasize with what Sarah was going through. And all those years hoping for a child. And in that culture was very important. A woman was really considered, maybe she had sin in her life. That was one thing. Of course, that really happened more, I think, with the Jewish people. And at this time, there was no Jewish religion yet, But still the culture, they frowned on the women, thought there was something the matter with them, And there was a pattern there that if in in that area where she grew up, where Abraham grew up, if a woman was not able to have a child, they could use a surrogate mother and have a child that way. And usually that child would then go to the wife. and the wife would raise the child. So we can look beyond and see at the time why Sarah might have that idea. That was something that was in her culture. Oh,
Is that Ur of the Chaldees, or is there two Urs?
no, I'm sure that's the same thing. Yeah. The Chaldeans, that was all part of Babylon too. So it's just another name, but that was a later thing. Later.
Don't you think that was in God's plan? Well, of course it was, that she not have a child until she had Isaac because of what Isaac would mean to all the Jews?
It was in God's plan because how many women in the Bible were barren for so long? When you think about it, Elizabeth, waited and waited for a child. Hannah wanted a child. It was nothing new really, but God uses those for special children that He's going to use. Rachel, yeah, she had to wait too, didn't she? So, yeah.
Samuel,
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth, John the Baptist, great men.
Yes. So, interesting things, some of the women did not know if they were going to be pregnant. I mean, Elizabeth had no idea until she became pregnant. She was going to until her husband was told, then she knew. But then there were those who were told beforehand that they, like Sarah, she was promised, but she had to wait. But she had the promise. So, yes. I don't know if it's easier if you have that promise or if you don't. I mean, both, it's difficult, both are difficult. That's,
Harder with the promise, 'cause at least you know something's out there.
yeah.
But if you
But you begin,
promise,
that's true, but then you begin to doubt, is it real? Is it, can I really believe that? It comes down to faith, doesn't it? I think about my daughter-in-law. She wanted a child so long, and she continued having faith that she was going to get pregnant, even just a few months before she realized she had cancer. So she just wouldn't give up on the idea, But now I see her in heaven just playing with kids, so singing to them. Well, let me see where I am now. So at the time that Abraham and Sarah left, they were 75 and 65 years old. In our day and age, they'd say, well, that's retirement age, and beyond. So, but they were just really starting out. And despite some of the bad decisions that Abraham made along the way, or Abram, God was blessing him. Even in Egypt, he was blessed when he lied about Sarah and became afraid. He didn't trust the Lord. He became afraid that he'd be killed. And when the Pharaoh found out that they were married, and he was really ready to give her back, and try to make amends with the whole thing. He had given Abram all kinds of treasures, animals, servants, slaves, money, all kinds of things, for Sarah. And so he just said, go. He didn't say, I want it back or anything, just take her and go. They believe that this is the time that they picked up Hagar, that she was part of that gifting. And it may be that he gave her to Sarah as a handmaid at the time he had her in his custody, so to speak, or she may have been part of what he gave Abram, and Abram just gave her to Sarah. Now, we just don't know that. Now, there's a Jewish belief by some that she was Pharaoh's daughter by one of his concubines. And he had so many children, that he just... and a lot of times in those days, they would kind of seal a deal, and they would give a child, their daughter, to someone else. And that would be family, And if he was taking Abram's sister, he thought, why, he would possibly make that gift of his daughter So it's very, very possible. We just don't know. But coming up later, it seems to fit Hagar's pride. So just little things that we can think about. No, we just don't know. Now in Genesis 15 now, they've come from Egypt, and now they have the promise of a child. And they'd been 10 years living in Canaan by this time. So Abram was 85 now, and Sarah was 75. And all this time they'd been hoping for a child. If she were married, let's just say 15, possibly younger than that, but we'll take 15. That would have been 60 years she'd been waiting for a child. And you know, I don't know when menopause hit her. We do know that it came a little later because it mentions that, but it could have been even earlier. So we just don't know about that. But she certainly, this day and age, she would certainly have passed that period of time. And I think about Abram. He could have looked elsewhere for a woman, for a child, but he didn't. He was very loyal to her, and she was beautiful. He loved her, and so we see that closeness that they had. And it seems to indicate that Sarah was a strong woman. And I'm not sure. Abram was a strong man with men, but sometimes you look at some of these men and they just kind of melt around a woman. And I kind of picture Abram being that way, you know, that she kind of ran things a little bit. Well, we'll kind of see that maybe. Sarah's big mistake was lack of trust in the Lord when she found out that there was to be a child. I got a kick out of one author. He titled his section of Genesis, "When Women Wear the Pants." And it does sound like that was the problem, all right, with Sarah and Abram. She decided at this point God needed some help, and she was going to help him out. And so she thought about, what happened in Ur? That's what they did in Ur, so that's maybe that'll work with us. And so after all, God does help those who help themselves. I know somebody told me that was in the Bible. I haven't been able to find it, but but she took it upon herself to help the Lord, and sometimes we get into trouble doing that. So something to remember. God doesn't need any help in that way. You know, we need to take it to Him, and then if He tells us, you know, if He guides us, that's one thing. But taking it on ourselves is not a good idea. It seems like when we do that, we kind of mess up God's plan, and then He's got to work around it. Not to say He doesn't. He certainly can do that. But it just kind of gives Him a mess in aisle 3 to clean up. So it's better just to listen to the Lord and try to follow what He wants. But I see Abram being the dutiful husband, listening to Sarah with her plan and agreeing. Enough said about that. As for Hagar, her circumstances were beyond her control. She really didn't have a choice in the matter. We don't even know if she knew God at that time. When God revealed Himself to her later, we just don't know about that. But when she became pregnant, then her whole attitude changed, and she became very prideful. And she was prideful that she was able to conceive and Sarah wasn't, and that haughtiness was just intolerable for Sarah. And it's possible, you know, if Hagar had grown up in a royal situation, you know, that would have fed that pride that she had, and felt like she could usurp Sarah's place with Abraham. And I assume that could happen at times, you know. And so maybe that was her thought, you know. She was going to have the child, so that was putting her in a better position than Sarah. Sarah was looked down upon. And of course, Sarah couldn't tolerate that. And so here's another bad mistake, a bad decision that Sarah made. She went to Abram and she blamed him for it. So Wrong decision upon wrong decision, and that doesn't one bad idea lead to another. Usually, we see that in David, when he saw Bathsheba, and then another bad decision, and until, it just builds upon itself. So she went to Abram, and she said, "May the wrong done to me," and she's talking about Hagar's arrogant behavior, "be upon you." In other words, she's saying, this is your fault, you fix it. Well, she's actually instigated the whole thing, but it's so easy to blame somebody else. We saw that with Adam and Eve last week. It's just so easy to blame the other person when you know in your heart that you had something to do with it too. And of course, Abram, how do you handle a situation like that? You say, "She's all your problem. You do whatever you want," Which, in other words, it was your idea. You take care of it now. And so she did. She decided she was gonna get rid of her. And well, that wasn't getting rid of her. Sorry, back up on that. She decided she was gonna just clamp down on her, and so that's what she did. Now, the Bible says she was treated harshly. I don't think it was physically. I think she was just really mean to her. And the Hebrew words say embarrassing her in public. So she would be constantly demeaning her in some way. And Hagar was so miserable she just ran away. And I thought about that. In so many situations like that, if a slave or if a servant ran away, someone would go after them and either bring them back or kill them. You just don't do that. You don't have that privilege of running off. But she did, and there's no indication anybody went after her. So I think she was treated well. It seems to appear that she was. Otherwise, other than the fact that Sarah was really not very nice to her. So here we have the situation. Not a really good one. The handmaid having the child, the wife not able to have a child, and nobody's really happy probably. Probably Abraham isn't very happy either at the time. But the angel of the Lord meets her when she runs away and tells her to submit, and so she follows him because he promised that he's going to take care of her and the child, and he told her the name to give that child. Now, normally it was the father's right to name a child, but here we see she evidently told Abram that she met with the Lord and the angel of the Lord, and he was to be named Ishmael, and that was the name he was given. So, and the name Ishmael means God listens. So it all fits together. And she was promised that he was going to be a wild donkey of a man. He was compared to an onager. An onager is a wild donkey from that area and that time, and they were untamable. You just couldn't deal with them. Nobody could. They just ran wild, and that was it, And that was the kind of man he was going to be. So she had that indication of his character even before he was born. Then in Genesis 16, his birth, Abram was 86 years old. And Abram thought that he had his son that was promised to him. And I'm sure he loved him. And well, the Bible says that he loved him, And so here this child was growing up all this time, as Jonathan Kahn talked about today in that little page that we read. He grew up thinking he was the son. He was the promised son. He was going to inherit everything. And I'm sure Hagar felt secure in that too, that she would be taken care of, And part of that process when when Ishmael became the leader of the people there, why then she would be the mother, and it would be all wonderful. So those first few years, that was how things were, that they expected that. So when Sarah became pregnant, that must have been a terrible shock to both of them. And what was joyous for Sarah and Abraham was, a terrible shock to the other two. So just trying to see the dynamics of the family here and what was going on. And I looked and I didn't seem to find any bonding between Sarah and the child. There's no mention of anything like that at all. To me, it's very possible that Sarah was kind of resented the situation that she'd started. She hadn't really accepted it in her heart. She didn't get involved with him because it doesn't tell that she did. So normally that would have been the case, in a situation like this. Kind of a constant reminder that she couldn't have a child. Now in Genesis 17, Abram is now 89 years old and Sarah 79, and this is when the Lord told him that their names were going to be changed. And at this point, Abram was to have Ishmael circumcised. Ishmael is 13 years old. Now this is the age, even now, when they reach religious manhood. They're still a kid, and in our sight and everything, but that's when the Jewish religion recognizes their manhood. So
When they do the bar mitzvah.
yeah, bar mitzvah, and for a girl it's bat mitzvah. So the one thing is that babies are circumcised, boys are circumcised at 8 days, because that's the time there's more vitamin K in their system than any other time in their life. So God just has that day for it, so that there's not any bleeding. And so,
And it's the first day after the mother's 7-day.
yeah, that's true too. That's good. And so I think about Ishmael. He's 13 though, and Abram had to be circumcised also. Everybody in the whole troop had to be circumcised. That must have been a miserable time for all the men in the family.
Yeah, so just
And of course, if you remember the story of Jacob and Dinah, we're going to get to Dinah later, why they took advantage of a situation like that and killed off all the men in that area. Yeah, so it kind of incapacitates them for a while. So here we see that, and it just seems interesting that Ishmael was 13 when all this took place. God uses certain dates and certain times for that, and it just all seems to fit. So now Sarah's got the promise of a child, and in chapter 18, she hears the visitors talking about that, and she thinks, can I have a child at 90? Who can blame her for laughing, really? I mean, wouldn't we laugh too when we heard such a thing? But she did lie about it. She felt a little ashamed and guilty when she was accused of it, and the Lord said,
she was still actively.
yeah, and so that's possible too. Genesis 18:13 through 15, let's go ahead and read that. I'll get there. Maybe. Oh. Okay. No, 13. And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. Okay. Then in Matthew, I think, did I write it in your notes? Matthew 12:25, it says, Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, and I didn't continue on, but I just want you to see that a confirmation the Lord can know your thoughts. And of course, that's what was happening with Sarah. He knew what she was thinking. And maybe that was partly why she was afraid, because he knew her thoughts. Genesis 21, verse 8 and 9. I should have stayed where I was here. Now we go ahead a little bit of time. We know that Sarah had a wonderful time with her baby, and in those days, and even in many cultures today, children will be nursed till they're 3-4 years old. It gives them a good start in life, and it seems kind of awkward to us, but that was the way it was done. And then at that point, then they'd be eating totally food that non-milk, that type of food, solid food is what I was trying to think of. And so there would be a party. They would always have a party when the child reached that age, because so often children would die in infancy or when they were very young. And so the idea that they made it to eating solid food, why, it was a joyous time. And so it was party time. And that's what we see here in this, at this time period.
A lot of children.
Pardon?
They had a lot of children, but was there 3 years between children, or was she breastfeeding all the time?
Maybe. But there, you have to remember, there was a lot of infancy deaths too. In fact, the lifespan in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, was 17. I always thought that was so strange. It wasn't the fact that that was all that anybody ever lived. It was that there was so much death, infancy death, that it brought down their lifespan to that. So.
That's why they were spouting kids all over the place.
Yeah, well, that's it. It was your inheritance. Your descendants were the inheritance, and they were to take care of you in your old age. They were your Social Security plan, and so it was important. And if the father died, then she would have children to help her. So it was all based on family type living. It was important. All those members had a place and had a job. Even the little kids were able to start. Little girls at 5 were learning how to spin and learning how to weave and do things like that, and watching mom cook, and learning all of those things that they need in their own lives, but still helping the family too. So they were having a joyous time. So 21, 8 and 9. And it's right there on the back. I have to go back one page. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. And mocking and scoff. Yeah, it's kind of actually the word has sexual connotations. And even today in the Arab world, young teen boys will do that with younger boys, and it's showing dominance. And so Sarah saw this going on, and she could not deal with that. She could not have that. Plus, I think she was afraid, because the Bible goes on to say that she was afraid that he would try to usurp the position with Abraham, the position of Isaac as he got older, or maybe even harm him. Remember, he was a wild kid. The Lord said he was like a wild donkey. So maybe she didn't trust what he might do as he got older. How old do you think he was at this time when Isaac was 3 or 4 years old?
18, 19, 20.
Well, he was 17, or at least 17. He might have been a little older, but at least 17. So he was well aware what he was doing, and he could have had that resentment, about this boy being the spotlight of everybody right now. Everybody, making over him and everything, and thinking that he should have been the one, in the spotlight. So you can see how that would be and how Sarah would feel. And so she just could not tolerate that. And so she went to Abraham again, and she told him that was not going to work. And she wanted him out. She really didn't want him there anymore. So you can see there was really no connection with that boy of Hagar's and Sarah. And so she demanded that he be gone. And of course it says that Abraham, he was just heartsick over it because he loved Ishmael. He loved both of these boys, I'm sure. But his firstborn, had a special place in his heart. And it also said, and Hagar, he had definite feel. I'm not saying he loved Hagar, like a wife or anything, but she had, as Ishmael's mother, she found a place in his heart, and he didn't want to send her away. He wasn't unkind, and so it really bothered him. He couldn't deal with that. But the Lord came to him and said, you submit and you do what Sarah said. And he said, I will bless that boy because I will honor him because he's your son too. And so he said, don't worry, I'll take care of him. And so Abraham went ahead and did as Sarah wished. But it must have been a very difficult thing for him to send him out that day. We know that Ishmael had 12 sons himself, and of course Abraham's grandson would have 12 sons. So kind of, the Arabs had 12 and Jacob had 12. So two nations were formed. Was it God's will that there'd be two nations? I think, this is my own opinion, it didn't seem to be in the plan originally, but because of what Sarah did and how things worked out, he's dealing with it and he's blessing them because he loves people. And so he's just working them into his plan, and maybe it was part of his plan, I don't know. It just seems like when we throw a wrench into his plan, he just covers it up and deals with it and has a blessing out of it also. But we have to deal with the consequences of what we've done. And there were plenty of consequences, and there still are today, as we know every time we pick up I say newspaper, but turn on the TV or whatever. Nobody reads a newspaper anymore, or rarely. So consequences despite things, but God still can work things out, and we can't ruin his plan. He just works another way. I think about Mordecai and what he said to Esther. He said, let me see, I think I wrote it down here. Do not think in your heart, and that was your mind, remember your heart was your mind then, that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. So his plan was for Esther. He put her there. His plan was for Esther to save her people, to be the major part in saving her people. But Mordecai said, you're not going to escape if you remain silent. Don't think you're not going to be part of the whole massacre. But he said, if you do remain silent, God's going to use some other method to save us. And so that's what he does. He always, you can't ruin his plan. He's always got something he can go around and use. So to remember that. Now back to Hagar and Ishmael now. They've left, and they're out in the desert. They're in the south, and where do you think they're headed?
Back home.
Yeah, where is home? Where was home? Egypt. Yeah, she headed back to Egypt, taking her son back there. But they ran out of water, and she sat down, and she left him over in an area and went away from him so she didn't have to see him die. And she cried out to God, and then it says that God heard Ishmael. I thought that was kind of interesting. It didn't say he heard her, he heard Ishmael. So let's see, let's go to 21:14 and read 14 through 21. No, I didn't just stay there. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and skin of water, putting it on her shoulder, and he gave it and the boy to Hagar. And it sounds like he's just a little guy. And you see pictures, where he's just a little guy. And here he is, he's practically grown. And he sent her away. And then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs, and she went and sat down across from him at a distance, about a bow shot. And that's kind of interesting because the Lord said that he was going to be an archer. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite of him and lifted her voice and wept. And the Lord heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, and I will make him a great nation. And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So here she was sitting by a well of water, and obviously it was there all the time. But she didn't see it. So often when we are so wrapped up in our own thoughts, our own frustrations, our own grief, fear, we miss what's going on around us. And I think that's what happened with her. I think it was there, but she just didn't see it because she'd just given up. And God opened her eyes, and there it was. And so, that's something for us to remember when we get in a situation like that. We get so wrapped up in our own problems, we forget what's going on around us. We forget to see the blessings around us. And so this is what happened with her. And she went and filled the skin with water, and she gave the lad a drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. Paran is really what they call Arabia. And so that's where he was the beginning of the Arabian nation. And his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Now this was also the father's job, not only to name the child, it was the father's job to find a wife. But of course Abraham wasn't in the picture at that point, so it was her position to find him one. And so obviously her home area was Egypt, and she probably got back with people she knew somehow, and she found him an Egyptian wife. So it all seems to come together that way. So why did I just thought it was kind of curious that he was the first one to really, and she probably gave him more of the water. Being a mom, I can see where she would take less and give him more, but yet he was the one that was really failing first. Now why is that? Well, I think it's the way we're made. I hate to say it, ladies, but we have an extra layer of fat. And that God gave us that for a reason. And I have heard that people, that are in the desert lost or something like that, the woman will usually do better because she's able to hang on longer because of that extra layer of fat. So it's just the way it is.
Is that for childbearing?
Well, I think it's like you look at the birds. I see the little hummingbirds, and the males are so bright and beautiful, and the little females are just kind of drab. But God made them that way for protection, because the little male, he has to find a mate and be attractive and everything, and the little female, she needs to protect her family, and so God makes the female have a little extra protection that way. And I just think that's one of the extra protections that we have to keep people.
Well, that's a good excuse. I like that one.
And I'm sticking with it.
That's my story.
God gave me this.
Maybe it's a blessing in disguise.
There's something called, I can't remember what it's called, but women that drop too much body fat cannot their children.
Really?
Venezuela or
Sports.
there's
Really?
it's called something.
Huh, I haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Probably messes up their
It's
stroke.
so
Yeah, well, that's true. Runners. I have heard that with runners that they don't have their periods.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anybody that drops too much body weight,
Yeah.
There's Venezuela, I think is
Huh.
what it's called, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, it's not.
Never had that
So-
problem.
So,
Oh, that's good to know, though. Okay.
it all makes sense, all fits together.
Yes, it does. He's a God of order, and we can just, we kind of assume things, but I think we're on a good path with things if we follow, because he does. He is a God of order. Okay, let me look at my notes here. Well, kind of wrapping things up, they had to wait 25 years from the time that God promised, beyond the fact that they had waited, previously. It's just, well, it was a miracle. God waited so long that it was impossible for man. So often he does that. And then we know it's from God. It is a miracle. And what a wonderful way to start out the Jewish faith, by a miracle like this. And of course, we have a miracle in the Messiah, the beginning of our faith. So, beautiful thing. She lost faith, Sarah lost faith, and decided to help God out. And it just caused problems down the way, but God was able to turn them around. And
was pretty decent, though. Just so we get 60 years before.
yeah,
It lived to be 100 and what, 20?
yeah, 127, I think, when she died. Yeah. So she had 37 years with her son and her husband, so that was good. But she never saw him married. She never saw grandchildren, because Isaac didn't get a wife until she was gone. And
This was the only child she had.
yes, yes.
Is that the only one Hagar had?
It doesn't tell us. Doesn't tell us about that, whether she married or not. Just don't know.
Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
Okay, I have a new theory. The men, like you were saying, the men are more bigger and more vibrant looking, physically looking than the females. But they're the protector also.
That's
So
true.
they have to stay out there and guard, and if they're big macho looking, then they, like you're not gonna run into a bull where a cow, you might walk up to it. thinking
Yeah.
That it's not gonna bother you, but still, the bull is more intimidating.
Yeah.
As a predator. I mean, as two-way predator. than
I think about a lion, and the lion's pride. He guards, but who goes out and hunts and brings the food back? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see that we've got 3 cats and 2 females and a male, and he is such a male. I mean, he'll just lie there, and they're the mousers. It follows through with that. It's just kind of cute to watch, because you just see these characteristics in them. So
What did they say about the hunter and the gatherer or something like that? The men are the strong ones, and the women are the ones that, well, you gather
The-
your chicks.
yeah, the nurturers.
The nurturers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that pretty much wraps everything up. Next week we're going to look at Rebecca. And I see her as full of spirit. She was up for adventure. And then she kind of had a mind of her own too, and she was a little bit on the sneaky side, as we find later, and you think of Jacob, he he was kind of like mom there, wasn't he? So he kind of got her traits, and I see Isaac. He was more mellow like his dad, you know. So interesting characteristics. So anyway, we're going to look at Rebecca and see the mistakes that she made, the decisions she made, and we'll just follow on from that. So
Didn't Abraham, he never made he always moved around, didn't they? Always.
well, they were nomadic, yeah.
So they didn't have one place that they built up, made a town for.
No, they weren't really in the making of towns. They'd kind of move. They had a lot of livestock, and they'd move, you know, for the areas. But he was very, very wealthy, and looked upon by all the nations around. You know, they recognized him as a very wealthy man, and he's really a brilliant man. He was a very interesting fella. Any comments or anything else before we?
I just laugh when you talk about a woman's weight, extra layer of fat. This has been something ever since I left my husband, because I used to be very slender. I used to have very nice, and I used to have guys acknowledge me. And I think a lot of this, the men being the beautiful and the women being the less colorful and being heavier, is because a lot of us, what is that word I wrote it down, did I keep forgetting? Modesty. Jackie has absolutely no modesty. And
You're telling the world here now.
That's off, isn't it?
No,
This is being recorded.
no, we haven't prayed yet.
All right, for the world to know, Jackie was never a modest person. I was always running around with half the dress I should have been wearing. And since I got heavy, I haven't had the men's attention that I had when I was,
You're dressing different.
well, yeah. But I think a lot of it is that, and I just call it my thorn in my flesh. I have to live with it. I have asked a lot of times, why I have to be overweight. Because there's being overweight, you miss out on so much. I mean, you're less active, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I think that's funny, that the men have to work being colorful and.
Plenty of men have weight problems too. It's
The modern men.
yes. It's our diets, and a lot of it is our diet. Yeah. So, well, we love you. We love you just the way you are, and you're beautiful.
More of me to love.
We all have our.
Once I was told I was a flirt. And, what am I doing that would make them say I was a flirt?
Maybe it's your eyes.
I see him. You're trying to see him.
If I were doing something wrong, I would change it. I mean, if I knew what I was doing.
It's part of your nature. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's close in prayer. Father God, we just thank you for this time. We thank you for your wisdom, Lord, and just help us to gather these little nuggets that we find and apply them in our own lives, Lord, because we have decisions we make every day, and we don't maybe realize the consequences and who they might touch. So help us to make good decisions and go to you if we have any fears or any questions about things, Lord, and we know that you will guide us. Help us this week, to go out and to share your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay.
Very good.
11:30. Well, we finished up pretty early today, so that's good.
So now,
actually